So as we're fond of saying, we're a nation of immigrants, although maybe we're not behaving like it right now. But, you know, my dad's side of the family came to this country around from 1890 to 1905. Italian Americans, so my grandmother and grandfather, Nono and Nona, were both, you know, Italians, spoke Italian, learned to speak English, and did so quite well. And then they gave birth to their 4 children. Anywhere from, let's say, 1917 through the 1920s, they gave birth to their 4 children. Those children were Americans. Italian Americans, yes, but, and especially my aunt, you know, held strongly onto an Italian American identity, but they're Americans first and foremost, and Italians kind of secondary. And to give an example, they all fought in the war in World War II. So my aunt was a nurse in World War II and went on for a long nursing career the rest of her life. My dad was in the Army Air Corps Band stationed in Santa Ana, and my Uncle Bill got drafted, got pushed into the OSS and spent World War II in China, which was a pretty interesting story. The Polifronis were really good linguists. Uncle Bill learned to speak Chinese in 6 months. Yeah, no shit. Pretty smart. And recognize, I'm not bragging because I'm frickin' adopted, so. All right. So, Helms model of ethnic development, identity. Stage 1 is the pre-encounters desire to be like the dominant group. Okay, so we want to become Americans, and my family was really big on learning to speak English. The encounter realizes they're never going to be a part of the mainstream or dominant group, and there was a tremendous Italian-American prejudice in the United States, you know, and Italian Americans were thought as kind of ineffective, kind of cute and quaint, etc., but relegated to, you know, kind of a narrow employment aspect, etc. Just the same thing happened to the Irish, the Swedes, the Germans. Everyone who comes to this country seems to have to go through that period. Now, some ethnic groups go through it for a much more extended period of time than others. And then you realize, well, I'm never going to be a complete part of this. But stage 3 is the immersion, complete immersion in the minority culture. That is, why should I change? And notice that to the extent that we create an environment where people get frozen kind of into stage 2, then they move out of stage 2 and say, why should I change? Because no one's ever going to open any doors for me anyway. And we see people forced into ethnic enclaves and kept there, right? And really kind of put a ceiling over them that doesn't allow them to promote out of it. But then immersion might be beginning to develop a more nuanced appraisal of both cultures, and notice this can happen over time and as acceptance necessarily changes. Stage 4 is the internalization commitment, experience of completing the exploration of ethnic identity and integrating it into a component of the self. But it's up for grabs and it's up for negotiation depending on, right, the immigrant culture and their acceptance by the population, the dominant population in the country. Social identity theory kind of goes off this, shifts gears a little bit though. Group membership brings the added benefit of increased self-esteem. And Tajfel and Turner looked at this all the way back in 1971. And what they find is belonging to a group increases my self-esteem. And to the extent that I can differentiate my in-group, the group I belong to, from those people, that out-group, as I create a difference, I perceive there to be a difference, I actually get more of a boost of self-esteem. So we can see that people in an in-group seek to differentiate themselves from the out-group. The result is they're motivated to do so because it increases their self-esteem. I'm better because of this. We're better because of that, right? Oh, look at those people, those backwards people, right? We're not backwards, we're forward, right? And then it, leads to the whole discrimination and prejudice routine. What Tajfel and Turner found is it doesn't have to be a superior group, that any group membership leads to a boost in self-esteem. To maximize the effect, they differentiate the group, and we favor the in-group, so we see us giving favors to the in-group, and then we derogate or somehow diminish the out-group. So, Jay, I know this is a never-ending assignment and a never-ending lecture. Bless you guys if you've hung out this far, right? Please list 3 important in-groups to you. To what extent do you derogate corresponding out-group members? And that's the kind of nasty question. It was interesting when I got to graduate school, and here's people who a moment earlier were undergrads, and then they crossed the line of summer, come back to school as graduate students. And it was funny to listen to graduate students, new graduate students, especially working as course assistants, talk about the lack of effort or the lack of performance of those kids. And that always cracked me up to hear them call kids. Here's a first-year graduate student calling a senior undergraduate a kid, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not so convinced of that. And I thought it was always cute because I was an old graduate student. My first year in graduate school, I was 42 years old, so I guess I could call 20-year-old kids legitimately. But listening to a 22-year-old call a 20-year-old a kid, I just found humorous as all hell. But it did serve to increase their self-esteem. They were differentiating, the graduate students were differentiating themselves from the undergrads. Okay? Matter of perspective, right? The beauty of the internet, right? And our ability to push forward just about any identity we want. So, let's talk about perception just a little bit. Social perception is the process we form understanding of others in our social environment, how others perform and act on the information we receive. Couple ideas here. When we talk first impressions, you meet some people, you create a first impression. Another way of putting that is the primacy effect, and this is a tendency to evaluate others in terms of first impressions. And there's no denying it's important to make a good first impression, and it's because of the primacy effect. So the first thing that someone might remember about you as time goes on is that first meeting or that first impression. Now, first impressions can be changed over time, but let's not bank on it. Some people are not that cognitively flexible, right? Now, recency effect we tend to evaluate people on the basis of our last contact with them, and that would be the context that's most recent that forms our opinion about them. I will say this, that if you are in a company that does performance evaluations, one of the things you want to do is you want to put your best foot forward maybe within a couple weeks of that performance evaluation, because the boss will remember those things. You can capitalize on the recency effect. So I know it's manipulative, but if you save up your best performance for right before the performance evaluation, then it can have an impact. Right? Now let's talk about self-presentation strategies. The public self is what you present to others, right? And to the extent that we want to look, well, no, not that we want to create a good first impression, right? And this is the public self. How many of you behave a little differently, let me go at it this way, with your friends than you would with your family? Would you say you're the same person going out for happy hour with your friends as you are sitting down to a holiday dinner with your family? For most of us, there's going to be differences in the way we behave, right? What does this have to do with adjustment? Well, to the extent that I'm one person, let's say with my spouse, and another person with my parents, following the diagram here, and yet another person with my neighbors, a different person with my boss, and then my colleagues, I'm different than I am with my boss. To the extent those are really different, then you see there's very little overlap as designated in person 1. This can create some significant adjustment challenges. Role confusion, as we talked, or role conflict can be part of this. To the extent that we're genuine and we're able to be genuine and authentic within all the domains of our interactions, within all the domains of our life, right, then there's less to adjust to. We experience a greater sense of congruence, as Carl Rogers would say, and adjustment challenges are not as severe. So, what can you do to manage your first impression? Well, be aware of the first impression you make on others. When we go into a classroom environment, what do I want to do? Well, I want to make an impression, and I want to make an impression that I'm qualified, so I'll often discuss my qualifications. Hey, you signed on to this class, and it's being taught by a qualified person. But at the same time, I generally dress relatively casually, so I want to create the impression of being approachable and somewhat laid back, right? So that's kind of the impression that I seek to create as I walk into the classroom, right? And it's relatively successful because I usually get that feedback from students over time. So, but your resume, for example, is your first impression, and there's lots of advice on how to create a good resume. Plan and rehearse your first few remarks. If you're going in a job interview or whatever, you're meeting someone new, it's okay, right, to have kind of an idea of how you want to present yourself. Often you're given a couple minutes to kind of warm up in that regard. Smile. It's always good to smile. Be aware of your style of dress and physical mannerisms and what the impression it creates. And often, if you videotape yourself, you can kind of see what's going on there. You can hear, your speech patterns, your use of slang, etc., but also how you hold yourself in these aspects. Ask yourself what type of clothing is expected for this occasion, and I would not typically buck. It depends on your power level. I mean, if you're operating at a low power level, like going into a job interview, you better be very attentive to this. Note that the clothing, as I described in my first example in the classroom, essentially the power level is reversed. I'm the one who's in power and others are not, so I have more flexibility in my choices in that regard. That's one of the things that power kind of grants us, is a greater level of autonomy and decision making. When you answer essay questions, ask yourself, how's your penmanship? And I know it's weird to think about, but there's been research, and I hate this research, but it's true, that if you manipulate penmanship, the ultimate grade changes as a result. Better penmanship yields better grades. Okay, all else being equal. Not a huge effect, but certainly effect. In class, seek eye contact with your instructors, right? And I've been taught as an instructor, that is, as you're teaching, then look at this person, look at that person, move your gaze about, move it in different locations of the room. But try and make contact with everyone in the classroom as you can, right, to increase the level of engagement and make a good first impression, like I care, which I do, but make that obvious that you do. Body language. Dr. Brown, Dr. Jack Brown on Twitter, I love his body language analysis, so if you're a Twitter follower, you might want to look for Dr. Jack Brown. He does a lot of great body language analysis, but body language is an important contributor to forming person schemas. It's something we attend to, and often we attend to it non-consciously. We don't process it consciously, but we build an impression from it nonetheless, right? It gives us cues about a person's thoughts, attitudes, feelings, eye contact patterns, body posture, touching, gazing, staring, all these things. And it varies by culture, so we have to be culturally sensitive about this. One gesture, right, may have different meaning in one culture than another. And remember, how many of you do the okay thing? Okay. And if you do this in Brazil, what you're saying is kiss my ass, so you probably don't want to do that, right? But now this has been corrupted in the last couple of years, because when I do this, what does this really mean? To a subculture within the United States, this is a sign for white power, which me personally, I don't feel is okay, so I just got to kind of eliminate that one from the belt, right? So, example, people in Bulgaria shake their heads up and down to signal no. And I had a boss at the Salem paper mill who used to do that same thing. Mike would shake his head no and nod his head yes. No, I got that backwards. That would be the correct way to do it. And how did I know when Mike was lying? Because he would say yes, and he would say, I can't even do it. He would say yes while he's shaking his head, right? And which one do you trust? Don't trust the verbal. Go for the nonverbal. Go for the body language before what people are saying. So what they're doing is more important than what they're saying. General rule in reading body language. So be aware of what you're telling people with their body language. Pay attention to your own body language as a way of helping to make impressions. And Amy Coty has got a great TED Talks on this, power posing. Breathe deep, chest out, stomach in, shoulders back. This creates a perception of confidence in others, right? So go with that, right? This says I'm weak and I'm impotent and I'm not powerful and I don't even know why you're talking to me because I don't matter. right? So be erect, be powerful, be potent, okay? So pay attention to your own body language as a way of learning about yourself. That is, your body can give you cues about your feelings if you attend to it. Right? Now, look at this picture here, and I'm going to ask you, how is that interaction going? What do you think? Is she buying what he's selling? And I don't think so, right? So, and for those of you who love to watch people, and I know that's a bunch of you, just like me, I love to observe people, and interactions like that I find frickin' fascinating. I can sit there and watch that shit all day long. Right, Penelope? You're back. Where have you been? All right. So, let's look at Teddy Roosevelt. With self-discipline, almost anything is possible. And if you look at Teddy Roosevelt, he was this asthmatic, wheezy, whiny, crappy little child, and what did he do? He committed to building himself up. So he exercised, he put himself in hard physical positions, he went out west and worked on a ranch. He made himself strong as a matter of choice, right? And he ends up becoming one of the most strongest images of a president that I think we've ever had, and he took on great challenges as a result, right? When there were monopolies, he was portrayed as busting up monopolies. He would go against the richest and most powerful in the country and smack them the hell down. So, internationally, he said the United States has to look big and powerful. That's our role in the globe, and that's something he did then, right? So, Teddy Roosevelt, fascinating guy, right? So, and this is Coty I was talking about. Where is she? Fake it till you make it. She wasn't supposed to become a successful scientist. What happened to her? Well, she wasn't even supposed to finish her undergraduate degree. Early in her college career, she suffered a severe head injury in a car accident. And doctors said that she would fully regain her mental capacity and finish her undergraduate degree. She proved them all wrong. Right? Today, she's a professor researcher at Harvard Business School. Yeah, pretty good job, right? Where she studies how nonverbal behavior and snap judgments affect people, among many other ideas. Her training as a classical dancer, another skill that she had to regain after her injury, right, is evidence in her fascinating work on power posing. These are live links so you can get to her TED Talks from there. How your own body position influences others and even your own brain. And a little shameless self-promotion here, a little bragging if you'll allow. I have an article I'm a co-author on with Amy Coty. So, Will Maddox, my buddy in graduate school, I described in an earlier portion of this lecture. He and I went on to publish something together, right? But then we drew in two other people because it was kind of a protracted study. Adam Galinsky at Northwestern, and Coty was at Northwestern at the time. So there is a paper out there. Maddox, Galinsky, Coty, and Polifrone, right? The four of us. Yeah, fourth author. I don't give a shit. Great article. And it's an article that's cited quite a bit to this day on model minorities. So pretty awesome. Anyway, self-presentation strategies. Here's a list of strategies. Ingratiation. So I can use ingratiation. What am I trying to do to manipulate an impression when I'm using ingratiation? As the table says, I'm trying to become likable to people, right? Emotion aroused in the target. I'm trying to make the person affectionate toward me. But there's always a downside when I try some of these, depending on how it's interpreted, which I can't necessarily control. Some people might look at me as a bootlicker, a butt kisser, if you will, as a conformist, right? So you can look down the list there. Self-promotion. I was trying a little self-promotion there. What am I trying to do? Hey, look, I published with Amy Coty. What am I trying to do? I'm a competent psychologist, right? And I'm trying to gain your respect in that. But it's a risk because for any of you, be honest, did I come off as kind of conceited? Maybe so, right? So anytime you try this impression management tactic, it might go the way you want, it might not, right? So regardless, you can look at the table as you will. So protecting, repairing, enhancing self-esteem. Coming up in the next part,